look at the voting numbers of early votes and absentee voting, he will have 270 votes. And that's with the Omaha Congressional District. If we lose the Omaha Congressional District, then it will be tied 69-269.
Oh my gosh! Now, is there any chance we only have a minute?
Michigan are so important.
Is there any chance he can steal Minnesota or Nevada or New Hampshire
1 minute.
from Biden?
Well, he lost New Hampshire by 4,000 votes last time. I think that New Hampshire is definitely in play. I think Pennsylvania is in play, and I think Michigan is in play.
Right.
But if I give Biden those three states, then it's going to be awfully tight. So that's why the president has been in Michigan
Right.
and Pennsylvania nonstop for the last week.
Well, he left it all out on the field.
30.
He gave it a tremendous effort. So did you, Senator Ted Harvey. Thank you so much for the work your group did. It was a pleasure having you on the program. Let's hope and pray for victory tonight. Thank you so much. And to our
Amen. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
Take care, Senator. And to our Real America's Voice viewers, it's been an incredible election season. Thank you so much for your involvement. We'll be back with you tomorrow with our post-election analysis. A lot more coming your way.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
Good morning, happy Election Day, and welcome to Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield. So glad you're here with us for the ride. I hope your voting is going well. Over 100 million of you have already voted, and we are going to break everything down about what you need to know. And joining me here on set throughout this hour is Joseph Weber. He is Just the News editor. Election Day is finally here. It's November 3rd, and I've got Merlin Carson here with us. We are going to break things down. She is a co-chair for Women for Trump, as well as Indian Americans for Trump and Medical Professionals for Trump. Good morning, Merlin.
Good morning, Carrie. Great to be here again.
So, Merlin, let's talk about this, because the polls are saying that the president is behind, that he's behind Joe Biden, that he has, in some cases, double digits behind Joe Biden. But then I spoke with, yesterday, leaders of the campaign held a press call, senior leaders, and they said there's a very big difference between what people say and what they're actually doing. They are looking at turnout data. So they're modeling based on who's already voted and who says they are going to vote, i.e. the actions are saying from their perspective they think there's going to be a red wave. Why is there such a disconnect between the polling and what people seem to be doing?
I think it comes down to the left mainstream media. What they're portraying. I just read something today that talked about, they're pointing towards coronavirus cases are very, very high in certain swing states, and it's just, it's convenient. And I think you look at the rallies, you look at the enthusiasm for President Trump, and then you also look at the messaging, right? For President Trump, they love this. They love the president. He has a good message. He has policies. And then you see the other side where the Biden, people who are supporting Biden, they're literally voting because they don't like President Trump. So there's a big difference here in how we vote and who we're voting for, and do we really like our candidate? And you see that in the Republican side, they really love and embrace the president. And so I do believe that they're going to come out today, as the president's message has been saying, come out and vote. And I think that's what we're going to see today. And that's what's going to change things.
Joe's got a question for you.
Good morning.
Hey, Joe.
We've heard so much about the outreach to Hispanic voters, black voters, and I know that Indian Americans have always had their ideals and policies have been aligned with conservatives. Can you tell me a little bit about the outreach to the Indian voters this year? I haven't heard as much as I have about other sectors of the electorate.
So we've been doing a lot of on the ground, a lot of reaching out, especially to these swing states and things like that. Indian voters, again, our population has doubled. We're very highly educated people. We have, wealth as well. So we've been making a huge target towards making sure that we reach them. And So we actually have a coalition. We have Hermie on it. We have Al Mason on it. We've been doing a lot of outreach. I was just down here in North Carolina last week, in Pennsylvania, reaching out to Indian Voices for with the Indian Voices for Trump, and we just did a fireside chat with Nikki Haley, and I was able to sit down and have a conversation with her on how she, her experience here has shaped things for her as she goes through. So those are important messages from key stakeholders in this election. We've been doing a lot of op-eds, so there's been a lot of reach. And I will say from 2016, one of the OPI numbers shows, one of the survey polls shows that we had 16% people that supported Trump. Now in 2020, because of the outreach, we have 28%. We almost doubled those numbers, and that's significant. And
that's impressive,
yeah.
Thank you.
And so what about on the issue of medical professionals for Trump? Because this is another area that you've been working in. You cross many platforms here with your work, but medical professionals for Trump, over and over, we've heard in the mainstream media that Trump doesn't trust science. He doesn't listen to the doctors. He doesn't care about medical professionals. Are you hearing this from the people that you're speaking to? How do they process what's happening in the mainstream media compared to how they view the president?
So, I will say we don't trust science fiction. We trust science. And I think that's what the president, is about as well. It's, all this media, mainstream media is talking about coronavirus cases, but, especially if they go to the polls or if they're out in rallies. But we're not talking about cases, if we're in Halloween time and, we just had Halloween. So what about that? Is that the factor for it? And also, let's not forget, we're testing more. So yes, we're going to identify cases. So we are very focused on science. There are a lot of physicians out there. There are a lot of, and healthcare tends to be Democratic, but there's a lot of movement just because based on policy, Medicare for all does not work. And I think physicians don't like that because they see that it's not going to help their patients. Somebody has to pay for it. We can't figure out who's going to pay for it. Let's just say somebody does pay for this. We still have the issue of we're taking away choice from people. And I think it's very important that people understand that. As a mom, I want to take my kids to a pediatrician of my choice, not what the big government tells me. So there are great healthcare policies that the president has, and I just don't see that in the Democratic side.
Scott? Oh, Joe.
Hey, if you had sort of one thing that you think that you would like to see improved with healthcare, what would it be?
I want to make sure that we have more conditions that are going to be covered, better treatment options. I'd like to see drug transparency. I think our drug prices are ridiculous, and I love that the president has been fighting for that. There's no reason why America should pay more for the same drug that Europe or Asia is buying for lesser prices. And I like that he's standing up and saying we need to fight for that. I like drug transparencies. I also like the fact that we're actually we're reducing costs for insulin and increasing healthcare access. And I will say one thing that we got out of COVID, if there was a silver lining to be had, is that, we've gone all this video teleconferencing right now. I'm virtual with you guys, and that's the same thing we can do with our patients. So access to healthcare is getting better, and I'd like to see that more. I like technology healthcare to adopt technology better, that we can actually have better healthcare access, and I think that's what we're moving towards. And I believe that with President Trump and in the helm, I think we'll see more of that.
Thank you.
Merlin, what are you expecting in terms of the verdict? Do you think we'll get an election night victor?
We can always hope so. I'm really hoping that it's going to be that's what we're going to see. But with this mail-in ballot, and a lot of this things that we're hearing, I'm not really sure that's going to be possible.
Well, we heard from the campaign that the Trump campaign said that the Democrats are preparing a narrative called a red mirage, where they say that Trump might declare victory because he might be ahead tonight, and that's the mirage. But come as these other ballots are counted, because the counting time has been extended in many cases because of court cases, then it will become a blue wave once all the votes are actually counted. Do you anticipate a blue wave?
No, and they were hoping for a blue wave last election with, when we saw with the House and the Senate, we didn't see that. So no, I'm not expecting that. And I will say the Democrats are really, really creative, though. They come up with some really interesting thing, and I think they have to because they have a very weak candidate.
All right. Thank you, Merlin Carson.
Thank you, Carrie.
Happy voting. And stick with us. We've got Scott Rasmussen, the legendary pollster, with us. You don't want to miss it. welcome back to Just the News AM, and happy voting, happy Election Day. We have Scott Rasmussen, the legendary pollster, here with us. Good morning, Scott.
Carrie, it's great to be with you. I can't believe it's finally going to come to an end.
Finally. And you are on the ground there in the swing state of Florida, which is very crucial for today's count. And I want to ask you, so I have, if we can put the headline up here on our website on justthenews.com, my latest article from this morning, it's looking at the Trump campaign. They're very confident. According to their modeling, they're saying they are going to win every swing state. Florida, they say they're going to win by 500,000 votes. Michigan, 400,000. Ohio, 400,000. North Carolina, more than 400,000. Arizona, 150,000. Nevada, 50,000. Wisconsin, more than 100,000. So they're very confident. They say this idea of a red mirage is not going to come to fruition. They say this red mirage phrase that the Democrats have been conjuring up, according to them, is not going to happen. And the red mirage concept, if you guys haven't heard, is this notion that on election night, tonight, Trump might be ahead, but that's the mirage because as the tally keeps continuing, the absentees, the provisionals, anything in the mail is finally counted, then the blue wave will manifest. What's going on? Why are they so confident, Scott?
Well, as with anything a campaign says on the last day of an election, it's a mix of fact and bluster and overconfidence. The fact is, people who show up and vote today are overwhelmingly going to vote in favor of Donald Trump. We've seen that in the polls going back 2 months. Trump voters have been committed to voting in person more than Biden supporters, and especially more committed to voting on Election Day. So if there's a big turnout, bigger than expected, that's really good news for the Trump campaign. My own polling in Florida, for example, shows the president is trailing a little bit, but with a stronger than expected Republican turnout, the race becomes a toss-up. Now, when you talk about these votes, though, the Trump campaign was talking about votes that have already been cast. They're counting real votes, not polls. That's a bit misleading. And the reason it's misleading is they know which parties have voted. They don't know how somebody has voted. So here in Florida, Democrats have about a 100,000 ballot advantage over Republicans. That sounds pretty close. But there's two things that suggest the Democrats have a bigger lead this morning going into Election Day voting. One, we know from polling that there are more crossover votes from Republicans voting for Biden than going the other way. So we can argue about the number. But at some level, the 100,000 vote advantage for the Democrats, or ballot advantage, is translating into more votes. And on top of that, there are about 1.9 million independents who have voted early. Independents who have voted early are leaning heavily against Donald Trump. So I would suspect the actual numbers coming into Election Day, the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, has a lead of 400,000 or 500,000 votes.
Joe Weber.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Hi, Joe.
Nice to see you again. There was, after the 2016 elections, as you know, some of the state polling was a little off. Lots of hand-wringing, for lack of better words, soul-searching about how we got this wrong and how we can do it better. Can you talk a little bit about two things? One, has there been much change in the way polling is done? And I don't know whether the readers or viewers know, but you do some exclusive polling for Just the News, and I've edited your polls now for the last 8-9 months. You do a particular type of polling analysis called cross-tabulation. So can you talk a little bit about both of those ideas?
Sure. Look, the fact is polling has changed since 2016. We don't know if it's changed enough. People are talking about specifics like the variables of how many people are in the sample without a college degree? How many white voters without a college degree? And yes, polls are definitely doing a better job of capturing that. But there's a whole range of other change going on in America. We don't communicate the way we used to. All of us are trying to figure out how to tap into this world of apps and online communications. Back when I was young, everybody talked on the phone. Well, that doesn't work anymore. So we're dealing with new methodologies. We're trying to get the best possible sample. I think what you look for polls, people who say, oh, Scott, your poll shows the president down by 7, this other poll shows him down by 5, which of you is right or wrong? They're missing the point. You need to get a sense of where all the polls are telling you and then what to look for. Tonight, what I would be looking for, the very first things will be results from a state like Florida. And the reason I want to look to Florida is because if the president loses here, and we'll know that fairly early if he does lose, well, then the election is over. If it's a toss-up and we don't know the results, well, then it could be a long night with, the president having a fighting chance. If the president does very well in Florida, then you might begin to think he's the favorite. So watching the real votes as they are counted and reported tonight is key. In terms of the crosstabs, look, the key is you want to understand how different segments of the population are looking. What that tells us about this year, about 2020 compared to 4 years ago. 4 years ago, more Democrats crossed over to vote for Donald Trump than the other way around. This year, with Donald Trump as the incumbent, we're seeing the reverse. Also, 4 years ago, more independents voted for Donald Trump. This year, we're seeing more independents vote against Donald Trump.
And Scott, what about this question of late breakers, though? Because you mentioned the independents who have already voted leaning toward Biden. Those are the early voters. We're seeing, at least from places like the Trafalgar Group and some other sources, that the late breakers, people who are now deciding, people who are going into the voting booth today, those folks are going to be breaking for Donald Trump. Do you think there's enough there to make up that gap?
Well, it depends on how strong the break is. It's absolutely true that 4 years ago there were some late breaks, but on the Sunday before the election 4 years ago, 14% of voters were not committed to either Trump or Clinton. That number is under 5% today, so not as much room for movement. The question is going to be how many people actually show up and vote today. And I guess that's a form of movement as well, because for some voters, the question is not for whom do I vote, it's do I vote? And the Trump campaign knows, every poll, just about every poll has shown that people who are going to vote today, Republicans and independents, are more likely to support President Trump than all the people who have voted earlier.
Joe?
Go back to that, what you were saying a little bit earlier, and other people have said this too. When we find out what happens in Florida and then we go to North Carolina, that's going to give people a pretty good sense before we move west of what's really going to happen here tonight. Is that what you were saying, and that's what others have said as well?
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's when I look at an election on election night, you have a baseline of what your expectations are. My baseline starts with my polling that the president is behind, say, in a state like Florida by 4 points, but with a strong Republican turnout, he can overcome that. So we'll look to see what the numbers say. If the president loses Florida, it's over. If we then go up to North Carolina and he loses there, it's over. If he wins both of those states, then we're going to be looking at the margins. And the bigger the margins for the president are in those states, the better his prospects are of carrying the other swing states and maybe pulling off some upsets in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those are going to be difficult states for the president this time around.
All right. Thank you, Scott Rasmussen. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And make sure you check out his podcast, Just the Polls, here at justthenews.com. And coming up next, we've got live on the ground from Langhorne, Pennsylvania, a key swing state of Pennsylvania. Our colleague Nicholas Balasay will be joining us. Stay here. welcome back to Election Day here, 2020. We're glad that you are here for Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield, and live from Langhorne, Pennsylvania, the swing state, the crucial, with 20 delegates in Pennsylvania, is my colleague Nicholas Balasay. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Carrie.
So, Nick, you're there on the ground. There's a polling station behind you. What are folks telling you? Because this was a very swing state, a very swing county, went very narrowly for Hillary Clinton. What are you hearing today?
Yeah, so it looks like it's a mix right now. I mean, there's Biden supporters, there's Trump supporters. If you look behind me, all the candidates are well represented. The members on both sides of the aisle for the congressional race. And then you've got a line. There was actually a really long line here this morning when we came. It's dwindled down a little bit, but I'm hearing about other polling places in Bucks County and Northampton that have long lines. So it looks like it's going to be a big turnout on Election Day in the crucial state of Pennsylvania.
Hey, Nick. Hey, this is Joe Weber. How are you? We heard so much.
Hey, Joe.
We heard so much in 2016 about the suburban voter, the swing voter, and particularly in Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia, main line. Can you tell us a little bit about the demographics of Bucks County and what type of voter that is?
Yeah, there are a lot of white working class voters in this county. There are also a lot of people who moved out of Philadelphia and settled in Bucks County. And if you look back at the totals from 2016, you had Trump winning Northampton County, which is a neighboring county, and just losing Bucks County by a slight margin, less than 1% to Hillary Clinton. This is a swing county for sure. It's had representatives in recent years from the Democratic Party in Congress, and now they have a Republican, Brian Fitzpatrick, the late Mike Fitzpatrick's brother, and they had Patrick Murphy before that, a Democrat, before Mike Fitzpatrick represented the district as well. So you have it's a swing county, so we'll see what happens.
Now you said you saw a big surge in the morning. Do you expect to see that people presumably going back to work? You've been doing this for a while, and then to see another big surge pick up at lunch?
Can you repeat that? It cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said that you've been doing this for a while, and certainly a lot of people show up before work, and then you said it's kind of slowed down a bit. Do you expect another big surge at lunchtime at the polling stations?
I think so. I mean, we had a lot of mail-in ballots come in already in Pennsylvania, millions of mail-in ballots. That could depress turnout a little bit on the ground, but I do expect it to pick up around lunchtime. And also you get a surge later in the day when people get off work. So I think we'll see a lot of that. And we are heading to some surrounding areas after this. So it'll be interesting to compare the turnout here at this polling place to the other areas that we're visiting as we get closer to Philadelphia, because right now we're right outside. We may venture into Philadelphia soon and see what's going on in the city. There may be some really long lines there too.
Nick, we got some sound from the president. Let's roll that about the key state of Pennsylvania real quick.
And they held Pennsylvania, even though it was, we only had, it was 98% of the vote was had. If I lost every vote in the 2%, I still would have won by a lot. They held it. So you and Wisconsin got credit, and that's okay, right? But I just told Pennsylvania, next time you take credit, so let's do it a little bit earlier, please. No, we're gonna do fantastically in Pennsylvania. But that was one of the most exciting evenings ever, and I think we're gonna duplicate. I don't know, can you ever surpass something like that? But we're going to at least duplicate it.
And that was the president saying that he is going to win the state of Pennsylvania. I want to ask you, Nick, because one thing that the Trump campaign has said over and over is that in-person voting is way more pro-Trump than the early voting, that the people who are showing up to the polls, many of them, they said as many as a third of them are people who are basically showing up to vote because the president told them to vote in person. They said about half of the people say that they are voting. This is according to the Trump campaign yesterday. They said that about a third of them are voting in person because the president told them to vote in person. Very interesting there, because a lot of people say that Trump is doing this because he's concerned about possible fraud, that people's vote might not be counted, that they might be lost. What have you heard from the Biden campaign on this?
Well, a lot of people do feel that way. There's a lot of people in America that just want to get to the poll and know that that vote is given to a pollster and that they can feel confident that that vote will be counted. I don't think that's really ever going to change for a lot of people when you consider the electorate is largely older and is used to going to polling stations. I think this vote by mail is new and a little bit intimidating or a little disconcerting to a lot of people.
Well, yeah, and in fact, earlier Scott Rasmussen reported about how people, if it's their first time voting absentee or first time voting in the mail, many more, I think it was 3 times more likely, they were 3 times more likely to get that rejected because they did something technically wrong. So that's something that I don't know that if the Biden campaign has taken that into consideration, just the human error that could be introduced.
Well, they have. I think Bloomberg has done a campaign, spent quite a bit of money to try to educate people on how to fill out a ballot. I know you have to have a signature and you have to return it in the right envelope. So they know that they've relied a lot on the mail-in balloting. Their campaign has been largely about the coronavirus safety precautions and not going out and doing grassroots campaigning, not having big rallies, encouraging people to do the mail-in voting. So, if they're going to rely on mail-in voting, they're going to try to make pretty darn sure that they get it right. So they've spent an effort to do that, and we'll see.
Well, and we've got some sound here from Joe Biden talking about Pennsylvania. Let's roll that as well.
We're in a home stretch now. We're in a home stretch. And as my coach used to say in high school and college, it's go time. It's go time. Tomorrow's the day. Tomorrow we're going to send Connor back to Congress. We're going to hear what labor has to say. We're going to win Pennsylvania, and we're going to show the world what America stands for.
So that was Joe Biden. He likes to mention the fact that he was born in Scranton. He didn't grow up there, though. His family moved to Delaware when he was very, very young.
He did, yeah. And he's always it's interesting after watching him and on the campaign trail for many years, he pretty much sticks to a script. High school football star, born in Scranton, moved to Wilmington, a middle class, tries to, portray himself as a middle class hero. And he's, if anything, he stuck to his talking points all the way through this campaign. His message has been pretty disciplined.
That's true. Well, and Trump supporters will say it's very contained because he is having, from their perspective, over and over repeated gaffes. They're questioning his mental acuity. They're saying that he stumbles over his words. He doesn't even remember who's he running for president against. The other day, he said he was running against George, presumably George W. Bush, wanted to get George W. Bush out of office. And over, he puts his foot in his mouth while his wife is sitting there next to him cringing. But I guess the big question is, this vote seems like it will come down to, do you want, as Biden said, this narrative that a dark winter is coming, or do you want Trump's much more optimistic narrative to open the country up? Therein lies the question of, it's really, how do you read the tea leaves? Is the president reckless? Is he careless? Is he cavalier about the coronavirus? Or is Joe Biden really wanting to control people and put them in this perpetual state of lockdown?
The dark winter was eerie. When he spoke about the future, he seemed to suggest that it was either one of them. And that was a strange way to project what you can do for the future.
All right. welcome back to Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield. This election day, well, the candidates gave their closing arguments yesterday. Let's play Joe Biden first. He was giving his closing argument about why voters should choose him.
Pittsburgh, there's one more day to show who we are once again. Tomorrow, we can end the presidency that has divided this nation. Folks at home would know. Tomorrow we can put an end to a presidency that has failed to protect the nation. Tomorrow we can put an end to a presidency that has fanned the flames of hate across this nation, pouring gasoline on every racial incident in the country. Millions of Americans have already voted. Over almost 100 million now. Millions more will vote tomorrow. My message is simple. The power to change this country is in your hands. And I don't care how hard Donald Trump tries. There's nothing he can do to stop the people of this nation from voting, no matter how he tries.
And there you have Joe Biden making his closing case. So, Joe, what struck me about that was that it seemed that Trump was really the focus of the argument, that it was really saying Trump is corrupt, he's not your guy, I am the alternative. It seemed very Trump-focused, and honestly, it reminded me a lot of 2016 when Trump was really the focus. I mean, in his time in New York as this brash celebrity, Trump's mantra was always, there's no bad press. So even if the press is negative coverage, especially when you have a president who is so against the press, and that's a big part of his campaign MO is to say the press is biased against conservatives, it's biased against people. Do you think that the president has gotten in Joe Biden's head?
Well, I have to agree with you when you compare 2020 to 2016 vis-a-vis Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in the closing arguments. Hillary Clinton largely did the same thing, don't elect Trump. And then when you take a look at the post-mortem, voters were, saying, you just didn't tell me enough of what you're going to do for me. What you had, all you really wanted to do was portray your candidate as the wrong choice, as sort of, the wrong thing to do, the mistake to make.
And let's put up the poll that we have, Just the News polling that we do with Scott Rasmussen. This is the latest. We did it on a monthly basis. The top lines of who Americans told our pollster was going to be their vote. Republican Donald Trump at 44%, Democrat Joe Biden at 51%, Libertarian Joe Jorgensen 1%, Green Party Howie Hawkins 1%, some other candidate 2%, and not sure 1%. What's really interesting, what Scott mentioned earlier, is that the undecideds and the not sure, it's a much smaller chunk this go round. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of people decided very early. I think that this is still a question that's to be deconstructed and analyzed right now. Nobody knows, but if you take a look, for as much as there's been several, October surprises, and we had the social justice protests in the summer, which threw the campaigns for a loop, and obviously the pandemic, how that really changed campaigning as we know it. No confetti-filled conventions, no grassroots campaigning, no big rallies, but the numbers have stayed incredibly consistent. I looked last night when I was doing a little research before I came on the show, and Biden has essentially led by about single digits since the last 18 months. So voters were really decided from a really long time who their candidate was going to be. And that's unusual.
Well, what's interesting is when I see our poll, along with many other national polls, it reminded me of what Nigel Farage told me last week. He was the leader of Brexit, and he said the morning of the Brexit vote, there was a lead poll that said that the Remain folks, i.e. the more quote-unquote establishment folks who didn't want to leave the EU, they wanted to remain and stay and keep the UK part of this global or this European shared union, that they were up by 10 percentage points according to this poll. Well, we know how it turned out. The Remain people, they lost, and the Leave people won, even though the polls showed that they were 10 percentage points behind. So it was very interesting because his argument was, in his view, that these types of polls are a suppression tactic. In his view, I mean, we're at Just the News. We're just the news. We're not into any sort of suppression tactic. So I disagree with him as far as intention or anything like that. But when it comes to methodology, and the Trump campaign said yesterday that people who have already cast their votes and the modeling around turnout is very different from modeling around polling.
I think that you just can't really dismiss the fact that, as we saw in 2016 and again in 2020, the Trump voter, is not as emotive as maybe some rah-rah Democrats. They're going to say who they're going to vote for when they go to the polls. They're not really willing to tell pollsters. I think that's always been, they felt like a secret weapon to them, that there is this completely sort of undecided mass out there that can move things without really tipping their hand early.
And that's what Robert Kahali over at the Trafalgar Group polling has said. He calls it the sociability desirability bias, or the social desirability bias, that a lot of Trump voters are even afraid to tell the pollster that they are going to support Trump because they don't want to be judged, and they also don't want to be on record. That's something that Nigel Farage said, was that he used the British phrase, they would use Anglo-Saxon language, which he educated me about what that means, which is apparently cussing someone out and saying, I'm not going to respond to your poll, and hanging up before lacing all sort of profanity toward them.
I think that they really appreciate the fact that, they sort of shocked the world by, electing a president that just pulled off an inside straight, winning all the swing states essentially, and, being down in the polls when it started. And I think that they appreciate that. They thrive on that. They would like to see themselves do it again. And so they've just been laying pretty quiet about what they're going to do.
Right. Well, and obviously, we'll see if Nigel Farage's theory is correct. He has been on Twitter, and he said he's making a $10,000 bet, as he has had made bets before. So he's putting his money where his mouth is. We should have him back on set, and maybe it can cash in on some of this. Stay tuned. We will be right back. We'll give you all the analysis that you need. happy Election Day and welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and glad you've been with us. So let's talk about Congress now. We've focused a lot on the presidential race, but let's move to the U.S. House. We've been looking at this here at Just the News. We've got the latest article. We can put that headline up. There are 33 competitive House races to track today as Democrats are battling to hold their House majority. They hold 232 seats out of 435, and Republicans would need to pick up 17 seats to take back control of the chamber, which they lost in the 2018 midterm elections. Now, our colleague Nicholas Balasay did this reporting. He noted that the experts, the Cook Political Report and also 538, the polling wonks, they say that they actually anticipate the Democrats are going to gain seats in the House. What are you hearing, Joe?
I would incline to agree with them. I'm not into the forecasting business, tea leaf reading, but I can't imagine, despite Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's optimism and President Trump's, I think the Democrats are going to add to their numbers. It appears as if, or at least I don't think the Republicans are going to retake it. I think what the more interesting story is if Democrats will add to their rolls with progressive candidates that win, and how that's going to shape the chamber, the House Democratic Caucus, and how Nancy Pelosi will lead from there.
Well, and then we saw that in 2018 with the arrival of the squad.
Exactly.
They certainly were pulling Nancy Pelosi further leftward. You saw early on in particular some tension between Pelosi and AOC, this young whippersnapper coming after the more seasoned lawmaker. Yeah. Do you think that there will be other kind of squad members that are going to be taking their seats?
I think so. Let's take a look at the first thing that really came out of the box was the Green New Deal pushed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the New York representative, and that stuck. Although the plan was never really a bill, it was a resolution, but it got people's attention all the way to the 2020 election, where it's been incorporated at least in Joe Biden's platform for renewable energies, and then I feel like to some extent they had an opportunity to work on maybe infrastructure stuff. But the push from the far left for the impeachment trials, that influenced the way the House governed and did legislative action for the entire session.
Do you think we'll see new squad members? Anybody new that will be winning? What seats do you think might be joining the squad?
I think that they're going to add to their numbers. I'm really not sure where. I think California is certainly the place to look for. A lot of these races are very close. What's the challenge in House races that you just don't get a lot of polling in those races, so it's very hard to predict who's going to win.
Right, and I'm just reading in Nick's reporting, he pointed to seats in Florida. For example, in Florida's 26th district, the mayor of Miami-Dade County is running against the incumbent. And also, you mentioned California. And in Utah, which is my home state, he's a former NFL player and a very prominent black conservative named Burgess Owens. He is running in the 4th district against the Democratic, he's the former mayor of Salt Lake City, Ben McAdams. I think Republicans see some light here possibly because Utah is such a conservative state. There was a controversy with Burgess Owens, though, because he said that the Mormon church-owned newspaper, the Deseret News, blocked his advertisements for the last 2 weeks of the election. It's called the Deseret News. I actually used to work for them when I was in college. But he's claiming, and he is Mormon himself, he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Burgess is, but he said this church-owned paper was blocking his advertisements, and the paper pushed back and said, no, we were not. It became almost a national issue. So that's another state we're going to watch. But let's talk about Senate now, and we've got a coverage headline on that as well. So looking at the Senate battle, there are 12 races that our colleague Nick Balasay found will just determine party control in January. Republicans currently have 53 seats and Democrats have 47 seats. So what about the races that you're watching for? I know we talked about Maine. What do you think is going to happen with Susan Collins?
Well, I don't really know what's going to happen, but I do know that her vote against or not to vote to nominate or appoint Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court, that's probably going to help her chances in a state that's purple. I know that upset President Trump, but I think that it was probably in the long term the better thing for the Republican Party and the Senate to at least win that seat, knowing that they had an extra vote. That's how politics politics works.
Well, and Trump's, after that vote happened, or she voted against ACB, Trump said, well, I'm not going to help you with your Senate seat. Do you think that actually was sort of an embrace, a kiss of life for her by stepping away by the president?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I think that was pretty good stagecraft, pretty well scripted, exactly how they wanted that to play out. A couple of the other interesting races, Tom Tillis looking for re-election in North Carolina. That race is very tight. He's closed the gap on that. And the one in Arizona with Martha McSally and Mark Kelly, that race is close. I think Democrats thought they had it in hand, but that's also very close now. Colorado, in which their candidate there, Cory Gardner, trying to win re-election against the former Governor Hickenlooper. I think that the Democrats are likely going to win that. Polling is showing that Hickenlooper's up pretty big there. So that's one race that I think that the Republicans are going to lose.
What about in Michigan? So the incumbent Senator Gary Peters, a Democrat, he's being challenged by this he's only 39 years old, John James, he's very telegenetic, African-American conservative. What do you think is going to happen there?
I think that one of the big things that really made it difficult for Peters is with Senator Ron Johnson in the House Homeland Security Committee and the big effort that he's led to some of these investigations into maybe the Flynn case and the Hunter Biden things, and where he's really sidelined Peters' inability to do that. And I think that voters, if they're really paying attention, are probably a little disappointed that Peters didn't get in there, scrap a little harder. Johnson really controlled that committee and what it did, and Peters had not much to say about it, not much he could do.
Well, in many respects, because it is a swing state, maybe him not being so angry about it might actually have helped him here on Election Day, but we'll find out. So stay with us. We will be right back after this break. welcome back to Just the News AM this election day. We are here from our studios in Washington, D.C., and we've got some footage here on the ground. If you just walk around here in the city, things are starting to be boarded up. Businesses are being precautionary here because they anticipate, after what happened with the summer, you had windows being broken into, you had looting, you had rioting. Folks don't want to leave themselves exposed like this. So it's going to be a very interesting day to watch here. Some people feel anxiety. Some people are worried. They're saying, especially if the president wins, ironically, they say the party that says they're for love and hope and tolerance would be the ones riding in the street if the president wins. But we're just hoping for everybody's safety, physically, be smart. Joe, what are you going to be doing Election Day?
Well, if I finish here, I'm going to go vote, and I'll probably try to get a run in, have a little lunch, and then just prepare for the big, long night. How about you?
Hunker in, same. I got to go home, go to vote. I might take a nap, and then it's in for the long haul. We know that President Trump is going to be hosting his watch party, his watch event on the state floor at the White House, and that Joe Biden is going to be in Delaware, in his home state. He's up in Pennsylvania earlier right now today. But just lots of barnstorming by the part of both candidates. President Trump had 10 events in 2 days. He certainly wants it. Joe Biden wants it. Obviously, we are going to give you all you need to know, the TikTok back and forth. And thank you, Joe Weber, for being here with us this hour. Stay with us. War Room is next.